And so mental health ministry, even on the reparative side, offers like community, encouragement, friendship, advocacy, education outside of mental health resources done by professional counselors that can really aid that person achieving wholeness.
Welcome to the Modern Ministry Podcast, where we discuss issues facing ministry leaders today with pastors, theologians, biblical scholars, and some Liberty alumni in hopes of offering encouragement and insight towards more faithful and fruitful ministry efforts. I'm Dr. Troy W. Temple, Dean of the John W. Rawlings School of Divinity and Liberty Theological Seminary, and we are so thrilled that you have joined us on this episode of the Modern Ministry Podcast. On this episode, our guest is Dr. Rusty Small, pastor, professor, Liberty alum himself. He has served in Christian education, Christian counseling, and the local church for more than 2 decades. He currently serves at the Liberty University John W. Rawlings School of Divinity as a professor of biblical studies, and I would add pastoral counseling. He's also the senior pastor of Liberty Baptist Church down in the historical Appomattox, Virginia. And he serves as a revitalization specialist for the Southern Baptist Convention of Virginia, where he wraps his arms really around in groups and cohorts those who are walking through church revitalization efforts. His passion has been the use of the Old Testament in the New Testament, especially in the Gospel of Matthew. He's also an LPC, licensed professional counselor in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and he brings a wealth of experience to the role of program director for our Master of Arts in Pastoral Counseling here in the Liberty Theological Seminary. On the podcast today, we want to hear more from Dr. Small on mental health ministry in the local church and how it intersects. Why is the need there, and how do we respond? So, Rusty, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of the Modern Ministry Podcast.
Glad to be with you today, Troy, and look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. You know, this is a strange new world that we find ourselves in at this moment. I know we've had conversations over the recent months and days and even years about the uniqueness of doing local church ministry in this time that we're in. And the Modern Ministry Podcast actually was invented. I mean, it was designed with today's discussion in mind. Before we can have thriving churches, we must have healthy, thriving leaders, or at least they need to be moving in that direction. So I want to start our time off, if you could tell us, when it comes to this area of mental health ministry, what in your journey brought you to this point in focusing on this type of health and development as a leader and just personally involved in mental health ministry?
Well, at the John W. Rawlings School of Divinity, we want to come alongside the local church in their efforts to fulfill the Great Commission. And so really everything I've done has been focused on helping the church. And one of the areas that I discovered as a pastor was the issue of mental health. After you finish preaching on Sunday morning, people come up to you with concerns throughout the week. They come up to you with concerns, and some of those concerns are mental health in nature. That led me on a pretty significant journey to try to address mental health from the context of the local church. And that is a little more complicated than I thought it would be, because clearly mental health ministries may actually be situated to best suit the church. And the reason that I say that is mental health ministry is a term that most may have not even heard. They've heard the term Christian counseling. They somewhat know what that is. That usually means a Christian counselor is someone who is professionally trained in counseling with the best practices, empirically based practices. They're conversant in the psychologies. They're also conversant in Christian theology, and they work hard at integration. Sometimes Christian counselors were counselors or psychologists first, and then kind of moved into the arena of counseling people. So you have Christian counseling on kind of this end. Then you have like pastoral counseling, which is a little different. Pastoral counseling is often done in the context of the local church and sometimes done by a pastor. And most people are going to that person to seek out resources. What I found out, this is not always true, what I found out, both serving in a Christian counseling setting and serving in the role of a pastoral counselor, is a lot of that is reparative. People come to you, they say, here's my problem, help me fix it. I think where mental health ministries sets in the context of the church is it really offers an opportunity for wellness, which is nice. You're not coming with a problem necessarily, although it can do that. It offers a wellness model, and it also leverages the one thing that a counselor does not have that the church has is the church. And I think we often forget about the church as a very important tool to address mental health. And mental health ministries basically is rooted in education, like helping people maybe who've gotten a diagnosis to learn more. It can be a supportive community, and it can be advocacy to kind of say, maybe they even spot some things in the church and say, hey, maybe you ought to go see a counselor. So mental health ministries is a way in which the church, not playing the role of the counselor, but can supplement the counselor primarily through education and advocacy, through a host of reparative and wellness tools that the church oversees that can really promote mental health in the context of a local church. I think it's a very useful way to leverage the church to address the mental health crisis that we face.
Yeah, that's good. And I think in that conversation, I mean, as you've done such a good job of helping us kind of grasp the different aspects of what we're talking about, there is a functional difference between the Christian counselor and the pastoral counselor and the person who provides leadership in local church ministry oversight for mental health ministry. Is it true or accurate to say that in the former, there's a real engagement in a one-on-one interpersonal interaction with folks who, like you said, they come with a problem? On the other side of that coin, with mental health ministry, it's someone who's giving leadership to a grouping of resources and intentionality that some of those one-on-one interactions are housed under, but it's really a bigger, fuller picture, moving towards just not fixing a problem, but helping establish a lifestyle of health, and that is multifaceted because it has to be holistic.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, a Christian counselor, writes a treatment plan for the person that he or she is counseling, but the treatment plan is between the counselor and the client, even in Christian counseling. But oftentimes that's 1 hour a week, 2 hours a week. That's it. There's a lot of life to be lived between counseling sessions. And so mental health ministry, even on the reparative side, offers like community, encouragement, friendship, advocacy, education outside of mental health resources done by professional counselors that can really aid that person achieving wholeness. On the other side, you're right. The church often has like a discipleship strategy, which is great, and discipleship is usually rooted in some metrics on how do we know that people are growing. Well, one of the areas of metrics, I ran upon this issue when I was being trained. After I'd been trained as a theologian, I went and was trained as a clinical mental health therapist. And one of my mentors said, can you be emotionally immature and spiritually mature? And the answer to that question, I think, is no. I think
that's a resounding no.
I think that to be spiritually mature is also to be emotionally mature, and I think Christian discipleship does have an education component of learning the Bible, and I'm very big on that as a theologian myself. But, it's just a life that is well ordered. I think about the
That's
book of
right.
Proverbs, a life that is known by moderation and self-control and discipline. And so mental health ministry can maybe not just address diagnosable mental health issues, but like even in the
Right.
area of like grief, or in the area of like personal finance, or in the area of like marriage enrichment, or in the area
Mhm.
of just things that happen throughout the life cycle. We go through different
That's right.
problems at different times. They can uniquely advocate and give the church resources at that moment, which I think the
Well,
church has but could do better at.
right. And you've just opened the door for that conversation as we think about these things, especially on the Modern Ministry podcast, where we're talking about where the church is today and what we're facing and the things we need to be well stated on. It has to be well stated. It has to be practiced and implemented from a biblical foundation. And this discussion on mental health ministry has to flow out of what we see that are foundational truths and theological tenets of the scriptures. When we think about Matthew chapter 22 and verse 37, I mean, Jesus said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." Well, that's not just a single part of who we are, and so to love Him with all, somewhere in that equation, we have to be caring for all so that all is healthy as we do that, loving God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our mind, those three dimensions. In other passages, of course, Jesus brings in the strength of what that looks like. So the physical aspect of being healthy is part of an overall mental health ministry focus. Are there any other really biblical tenets or truths that would help to guide the urgency and the need for continuing to have this as part of a local church's ministry?
Well, sure. I mean, I think the church should be the place that encourages wellness. I think it should encourage human flourishing. Um, and yet it does so not with a definition that we have developed, but the
Right.
ultimate goal for the Christian is to be conformed to the image of Christ. And
Amen.
so everything that we're doing, whether it's bringing problematic emotions under the control of Christ, or confession of sin, or whatever it is, that we have the Christian worldview ultimately to be conformed to the image of Christ, undergirds that. In Christian counselors do in some ways reject certain types of interventions or thoughts, because they say, well, those aren't consistent with the Christian worldview. So I think all that we do is clearly filtered through the authority of the Bible. I just so that I want to say that full stop, but I also want to say that sometimes just doing things like there are plenty of community groups that would just do grief. Okay. Like
Yeah.
even I visit the hospital pretty regularly. Unfortunately, I watch people die pretty regularly. I watch the widow or widower, grieve. And there are plenty of community resources to help that person who's just dealing with grief. But I think there's
Mm-hmm.
something special that when a community resource, like let's just meet once a week and do grief work, rather than
Right.
that be housed in the community, I think something uh, unique happens when it's housed in a church building. It sets a new
Absolutely.
tone to it. Like people come to the church, and I've watched this happen just because it's. I mean, we know that the church is not a building, but sometimes when it happens in a church building, the grief work becomes, just because of its location and space, becomes
Right.
more spiritual in nature. Like people start thinking about, what about life after death, and what do I think about that, and all of these things. And so in some ways, like the church being a place to offer mental health ministries, just taking some of the community things that are consistent with the Christian
Mm-hmm.
worldview and just housing them in a church building, actually strangely almost changes the way people perceive what is being offered, and somehow connect what they might not connect to their spiritual journey. They connect it to their spiritual journey because it's housed in the context of a local church. And in some ways, all that is just offering space in a building that you need.
That's right.
And obviously it has to be consistent with the Christian worldview. I've got quite a few kind of storied examples on that, like one church decided to just have AA in their building just to offer a space. And because it was offered in the church building, that led not only to an opportunity for the person to leave alcoholism behind, but led to several opportunities for gospel sharing, ultimately for the person to come to faith. So I think connecting all these together just has real positive dividends for the church.
Yeah, absolutely. That we miss all too often those opportunities to walk through those doors where we think about just what happens with our church inside that church. But as you said, there's a double, I think, emphasis, one on the context of it happening inside the local church as an opportunity for the local church to support the transformation and the service and the ministry for those who are impacted by that, but also the partnership with the local community. The majority of churches that most of us could never name in any given county or state are in small town contexts. And to be an asset or a community partner in this way opens up so many doors that God's Spirit can work deeply in those measures. Let me ask you this, though. What are some signs? And I'm just thinking through, if I'm a pastor, I'm listening, and I'm in a church context, and I know that there are these needs around. What are some signs that a church might benefit from developing a mental health ministry?
Yeah, so most churches on some level feel the need, already have some of the components of mental health ministry present. At least we would hope so.
Right.
The first thing, I hate to say this, it often does start with the pastor, for the pastor just to recognize the need that his parishioners are struggling. And when I worked in the counseling office in Richmond, one of my responsibilities since I was a pastor was to go to local churches in Richmond with the guy that I work with, and we would talk to pastors and just say, because we would actually open counseling offices in churches, that we would send therapists to the churches, but they would be part of another agency. And sometimes pastors would meet us and we'd say, hey, we wonder if you need a therapist in your church and it would help with and it'd be no cost to you and all this type of thing. And some of the pastors, well, I think our people don't struggle with any of that. So so on that was eye-opening to me. I said, well, so first of all, just a general awareness that the pastor or the church leadership has that, anxiety, depression, other mental health. There's almost no family in that you know of that probably doesn't struggle. Some family members are struggling with some level of mental health. So even if it's not you, it's probably somebody pretty closely connected to you that you'll need to advocate for. So I think the church just being aware of the mental health concerns in the church, and then looking at kind of prepackaged resources. There are tons of good prepackaged resources. Oftentimes mental health is always like in a recovery model, but we do have Celebrate Recovery, and that's something that's been utilized. Mental health is bigger than a recovery model. There is like Grief Share. There's plenty for like divorce. There are plenty great things on like parenting, on marriage, on finances, on aging, on retirement, on midlife crisis, all the stuff.
That's right.
There's tons of prepackaged things. Step parenting. I've seen how children with autism. All there's tons. So the pastor could never, or the church leadership, he could never facilitate counseling all those people.
Right.
What he could do is he could take some of the things that are prepackaged and get some lay leaders to own those. And now, guess what he's established? A mental health ministry in his church. And if he says, well, I don't have the leadership, what about community resources? Could he partner with those and just be a place for them to meet. All of those things really do build out a pretty robust mental health ministry that serve as a complement to your discipleship strategy.
Absolutely. And the thing that gets missed, I think, as well, is that this is not really something that churches can identify that they need based on the problems they're facing. There's also an identification of getting upstream on these issues and helping people stay strong and remain strong to get upstream on these issues that they may or may not see. And some of those could be averted or lessened in their impact if you're able to preload the right practices and the skills and the rhythms of life that help to compensate and even address some of those areas that could be pitfalls otherwise. And so when you think about dealing with the relational struggles and issues, well, the one way to address some of that is always be building strong communication and strong opportunities for safe places to have the conversations with whatever is potentially facing. And so there's both a receiving what's coming at you, but also getting upstream and preparing long in advance before those grave situations arise.
Well, and one of the ways to form out mental health ministries is human growth and development. I mean, we have a life cycle. And in each era, I mean, psychologists, sociologists, we kind of know in every era generally what's what's coming for us on some level. Early childhood development, you've got your own bonding issues in early childhood development, and that in adolescence you've got your own issues in your early 20s, and then young married, if that's what you choose to be married, or single. Like, we kind of know what we face generally in every era. So you're right, there can be a much more proactive attempt to get in front of things that could be an obstacle for us. We could prepare.
Well, and I don't know that I'm saying it right, but an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of the cure. And so it's it definitely is more wise to think through what we know is in a cycle generally in how people live. So when we think about modern ministry, or not modern ministry, but we think about mental health ministry, obviously it's a modern ministry issue. What kind of training or background should someone have in order to serve effectively in that kind of a role?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think the good news for, I hope through the School of Divinity, we start producing some mental health ministers, because I actually think that mental health ministers might actually fit better in a church context than just a pastoral or Christian counselor. A pastoral or Christian counselor, their educational requirements are pretty steep. Usually to be a pastoral counselor or a Christian counselor or licensed therapist, you have to do kind of what the state wants you to do, and they have some, for good reason. They want to hold a standard. They want to make sure that when you go and sit in front of a professional, you're getting a certain service. That's good. That's good. So I'm not having an issue with that. But a mental health minister is, I would say, a specialized discipleship pastor on some level. A discipleship pastor is doing, what they're doing to kind of walk a person through the stages of discipleship. But a mental health minister is just acutely aware of the life cycle, what's going to happen. He or she is acutely aware of, major mental health diagnoses, so that he or she could spot them in the congregation and offer services, and then very aware of resources, and would just kind of set resources up both reactively to the needs of the church. Children with autism is a real thing in our world right now.
That's right.
Well, I can't tell you how many times, a mother's come to me and says, I think my child has autism. What am I to do? Well, first of all, that mental health minister would know where to refer, and then would offer support and education and advocacy for that mom and that child. That is huge for the church. But then that
Yes,
mental
it
health minister
is.
wouldn't have to meet with that mother and child weekly to work through
Mm-hmm.
things. That the mental health minister would set up a community of wellness, and then here comes a whole group of whatever widows. All
Right.
right, well, let's do some
Right.
community. Let's do some grief work with them. Let's make sure, spot clinical depression if it's starting to rear its head and all of that.
Right.
But a mental health minister just has such a great deal more bandwidth to
Yeah.
be utilized to a host of people and to set up a community that encourages wellness.
That's so good. And honestly, that position could be from a layman's perspective, or depending on the scope of the ministry, could be a full-time position, or even a part-time
I would
position.
almost want
So
discipleship pastors now with a mental health awareness so they could
there you
almost
go.
combo the position.
There you go. That's good. So, as we kind of wrap up our time today on the Modern Ministry Podcast, I want to ask, what are some first steps for pastors who want to explore this kind of ministry, but they feel undersourced?
Yeah. Well, to educate themselves on the sources that are out there. I just literally had this conversation with a pastor last week. He said, he actually said the former pastor, he was a Liberty grad. He said the former pastor
Right.
was excellent at like pastoral counseling. He said, I'm not. And he says, but all these people are expecting me to do this. Help me. And I said, well, the first thing is, praise God for the last pastor who counseled everybody, but you're probably not going to do that because it's over your head. I said, you need to start thinking about mental health ministry. And he said, well, what is
Yeah.
that? I said, are there some lay people who feel the same as you? Yes. So he saw the need. He recruited some lay people to discuss with him what he saw in the church. And then I said, just help them to discern the areas they're most passionate about. Well, I'm
Mm-hmm.
most passionate about whatever. Another place of mental health ministry, which may not sound like mental health ministry, is like supporting a person through cancer. Okay,
Right.
so I know plenty of people who had cancer and beat it. So what do they do? They now naturally support other people who have that. That's a mental health ministry because cancer is not just
It
a
is.
sickness; it's a psychological weight on a person. So I
It
said,
absolutely is.
um, see the vision for mental health ministry, recruit people, and then go gather all these resources. And I said,
Mm-hmm.
you just have to start educating yourself. I said, whatever issue you want to address. He mentioned, I'm doing a lot of premarital counseling. So I mentioned to him, well, there's Symbus and Prepare and Rich, neither of which that he
Right.
had heard about. I said, well, look them up, go get trained in them, and maybe, or get one of your laymen to be trained,
That's
and
right.
then and offer that. And so it's just seeing the need, recruiting a team, resourcing them, and then don't try to do too much too fast. Pick an area, execute it, work through that one, and kind of,
That's right.
I'm more of an incrementalist. Like, let's build it out slowly and build it up strong.
Exactly. That's good. Well, and even that last point, that's really how I love to wrap up our time on every podcast episode, is how do we encourage others? And I think that is the encouragement, that we don't try to attempt more than you need to as you initially step into these waters. Find some winnable goals or mile markers, find those resources, and don't underestimate the impact of some of those initial measures that may seem smaller. When something's not being attended to, the smallest efforts can yield some of the greatest fruit. And so I think that's a great encouragement for our time. Well, Dr. Small, thank you so much for being with us on this episode of the Modern Ministry Podcast. It's been a great encouragement, and I trust our listeners will feel the same.
Thanks.
And I want to thank you for joining us as well on this episode of the Modern Ministry Podcast. For information on Liberty University, you can go to liberty.edu. For information on the John W. Rawlings School of Divinity, you can still go to liberty.edu/divinity. If you want more information about the Liberty Theological Seminary, once again, liberty.edu/seminary. We look forward to gathering with you on the next episode of the Modern Ministry Podcast, encouraging ministry leaders with biblical truth, cultural insight, and practical leadership application.